Welcome back to Malden's Revolution. I'm Mark Linehan.
And where have you been?
I know it's been a while since we've done a Malden's Revolution video, so many of you must be thinking the war's over by now, right?
Not even close.
Now, the brilliant Ken Burns may be able to take the 8-year-long American Revolution and condense it to only 12 hours, but we've only been doing these videos for the first 8 months of the war. We've only covered less than 10% of the American Revolution so far.
But what's been going on the last few months? Surely we've missed a battle or two?
Well, the last time we met, the siege of Boston was underway and Malden had successfully repulsed 2 British attacks across the Mystic River. But the important thing you have to remember is that we're not talking about the Battle of Boston, we're talking about the Siege of Boston.
Sieges were meant to defeat cities by surrounding them, isolating them, and starving them out. The problem is, while we have enough men to deny the British the ability to leave Boston by land, we don't have enough ships to deny the British the ability to leave Boston by sea. So the British can be supplied indefinitely, and neither side has a clear path to victory. Now, back in November, the Continental schooner Lee had seized a supply ship called the Nancy, which was one of the first cases and one of the most successful cases of the Continental Army successfully stopping a British ship from docking in Boston. So now the British are rightly concerned that the rebels can stop vital supplies from reaching Boston. And the commodity the British most desperately needed was firewood. While firewood is always required for the cooking of food, it gets more and more important the colder and colder it gets, and this is the first winter of the Siege of Boston. Also, Boston is not only a very small area, it is a highly urbanized area. There are no forests and very few trees left to warm the British Army. There is nowhere near enough wood in Boston to keep the British Army from freezing to death until the spring. But 250 years ago today, on December 15th, 1775, General George Washington reveals in a letter that the cold that leaves the British Army vulnerable also gives them a strategic opportunity. In a letter to Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Reed, Washington wrote, "The fortunate capture of the storeship has supplied us with flints and many other articles we stood in need of, but we still have our wants." This is in reference to the Lee capturing the Nancy. "We are securing our approach to Lechmere's Point, unable upon any principle whatever to account for their silence." This is referring to the fact that the British have not fired on the Americans while they've been fortifying Lechmere's Point, "unless it be to lull us into a fatal security. If this be the drift, they deceive themselves, for if possible it has increased my vigilance and induced me to fortify all the avenues to our camps to guard against any approaches upon the ice."
Now, with today's climate issues, it seems implausible. However, even well into the 19th century, there are times where Boston Harbor froze over completely and Bostonians were able to walk a mile into the ocean on solid ice. Despite being significantly smaller, it is actually less likely that the Mystic River will freeze over completely than the Mississippi River, due to the fact that the Mystic River is technically a tidal estuary and has a much higher salt content.
So here is our beautiful Steve Fama map from the city of Malden, this map that we have gotten so much use out of the past 8 months, and Steve, I still owe you pizza. So here you have on our Steve Fama map, this is what the situation was in the winter of 1775. The British Army is in Boston and Charlestown with about 5,000 men, and they are surrounded by various Continental Army troops, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, totaling about 18,000 men. Now, the concern that General Washington brings up in this letter is the concern that the British will have more options if Boston Harbor freezes over. Now, I know that this map is a modern map and has a lot of landfill in it, but that interestingly doesn't matter for what we're talking about, because where we have since filled in the water with landfill, what we're talking about is all that water becoming traversable ice. So looking at this map really quickly, what you can see is that the majority of the Continental Army is concentrated in what is today Cambridge and Somerville. So here is Charlestown. Here's the original Charlestown Peninsula here. And a lot of the troops are gathered on Prospect Hill, just outside the Charlestown Neck, and on Winter Hill, which is in today's Somerville. And between all the different troops headquartered in Cambridge, that totals about 2,100 men in Cambridge. So across the Charles River and down the neck from Charlestown, we have about 10,000 of the Continental Army and the militias of New England are concentrated in this area here. To the south, where the only land route in and out of Boston was, you have about 5,000 men stationed in Dorchester and Roxbury and elsewhere. Now you'll notice that these numbers do not add up to about 18,000. That is because there is this little item here, 3,460 that Washington lists as men in other places. That means that there are about 3,500 men elsewhere all around this area, including the men who would have been stationed in Chelsea and Malden across the Mystic River. So what could have happened is the British could have decided to send some men across the Mystic River or even walk up the Malden River right into downtown Malden. And the reason why downtown Malden might have been a good spot to go is twofold. Let me adjust where this is filming right now. So downtown Malden is right here. And what is today Route 60 is the road that goes through downtown Malden. You take a left and you head straight to Medford, where at this time, much of the other militias and other armies that were coming in from the north were gathering in Medford, like General John Stark. So you could walk up the Malden River, take a left and attack Medford, or Route 60 that goes through downtown Malden was originally called Salem Street. This is a highway that leads right to Salem. So if you wanted to just simply walk some troops across the frozen water up into Malden, you're in Salem in a matter of hours. Now, we know that none of this actually happened. The British, this did not freeze over. The British did not walk up into Malden or anything like that. However, what would the impact have been on all these Massachusetts troops? This army of about 18,000 men is vastly made up of Massachusetts men. What would have happened if the British had broken out and attacked one of the other towns in the north? Every single one of these militiamen from a town near Boston would have immediately run home to defend the threats to their towns.
We had previously mentioned how there were only 2 companies of militia guarding the north side of the Mystic River in Malden and Chelsea. If the Mystic River were to freeze over completely, the British Army would have no difficulty of simply walking across the river and penetrating deep into the north of Massachusetts. And if they did this during a storm or blizzard, it is possible that they would walk right by the Continental Army and militias of Malden and Chelsea completely undetected. Now, sure, this scenario might seem a little outlandish. Oh, Mark, you're just trying to make it seem like Malden was the heart of America's Revolution. But Malden was actually known throughout the 17th and 18th centuries for one specific resource that the British now need. Before Malden was even settled in 1640, back when it was simply the Mystic side of Charlestown, Malden was primarily used as the main source of firewood for the inhabitants of Charlestown. Well into the 17th and 18th centuries, many inhabitants of Charlestown maintained woodlots in Malden for the purpose of supplying them with firewood. So if you have a British army desperately short of firewood and a Continental Army with a completely exposed northern flank and a new frozen road to take, this is an excellent idea for any British military planner. Remember, we talked about this during our Battle of Bunker Hill video. General William Howe himself proposed taking ships up the Mystic and landing in what is today Somerville and attacking Bunker Hill from the other direction. That's not what happened. However, multiple war plans were made before one was finally chosen. It is entirely plausible that there was some plan drawn up by some British military planner that said, we should wait to see if the river freezes over and then we should invade through Malden.
So will the Mystic River or Boston Harbor freeze over? Will the British break out of Boston and attack the surrounding towns? Will Washington ever find a way to win the siege? See you soon.
For those of you who are curious, it is 25 degrees.